Hi, this is my final for Spreadsheets. Um, I'm choosing to do a Visual Basic for Applications final because it just so happened that in my job I did a very significant um, task that involved Visual Basic, and it would not have been possible without Visual Basic. So I really was lucky to be in this course at this time because I learned a lot of things that let me do my do this huge job at work, and it really, like I said, it would have been impossible without it. So I just wanted to discuss this project and go through some of the VBA that I actually wrote using concepts learned in the course. So essentially, what we had to do was for my work was create data that would be then used to plan the yearly revenue. So for all these accounts, we had to populate the revenue plan, broken down by area, region, partner, service, product, service line, etc. So it was an extremely complicated job, and so there were about 300 accounts, and each account needed to have about 1,000 lines of data just to capture all of the variability. So there was no way that I was going to be able to create that comes out to hundreds of thousands of lines of data. So I needed some way to automate that. So what I did was I created some macros to help me with it. And firstly, I did I created a template for one account that had all the data I needed. And essentially, what I was going to do was multiply that template for each of the accounts that I had, each of the 300 accounts. So I'm going to show you the macros that I used. So the first macro here, I've sort of used the some comments for documentation. So I initially, declined these variables, and I basically created a loop. This loop it goes through a list of the 300 accounts, and it will then copy. Here you see here it's copying a range from the template and creating the data for that. So this is essentially a long way of looping through 300 accounts, copying the thousands or so lines from the template, and then pasting it into a new sheet. And I had to create 3 different macros for this because there's 3 different account types. So the first this is the first account type, and this is has a different template. This is the second account type, has a different template, and this is the third the macro for the third account type with the different template. So these are all essentially using the same concept, but they are pulling in data from different. They're pulling in templates from a different template. So the 300 accounts are all being kind of broken into 3 categories, and then I use a macro for each category. So the end result of running these 3 macros on the 300 accounts is a data tab that had over 300,000 rows in it, and the file got really complicated, and I'll some of the later macros I'll show you had to do with fixing some of those size complexity problems. And obviously, I can't really show you the data because it's confidential to the firm. So I wanted to be able to show some data, but I don't think the firm would be okay with that. So this first module is dedicated exclusively to looping through the accounts and creating the data. The second module I have here was this is really useful. There were some errors in these templates that we sent out to people, and so rather than go through and manually fix each, basically what was wrong was that some values were incorrect in some of the fields. So rather than go through each 300 template, and each of the 300 templates, and then fix each individually, I just had a macro that just, as you can see here, this just changes the value of these cells to the proper values, And I sent these to my boss, and he ran these on his computer. So every time we got a template back from an account, he would just run this, and it would be fixed. And there was no way he didn't have to know what was going on. He just did it. So this sheet was really, these macros are really great. Same thing here. This is for a different account type. This is changing a different value. Another problem we had with when the file got so large is we had this weird bug where when we were creating pivot tables, every time you saved it as a new file, it would essentially link, each pivot table would be linked to an old version of the file, and so you couldn't update the pivot tables. So I had to create a macro that would refresh all the pivot table. It's called a pivot table data cache. So each pivot table is linked to a set of data, and you can we needed to be able a way of updating that really easily. So this is what this does. I'm not going to really go through all the detail, but it essentially creates a loop, and it's checking to see what each pivot table cache is, and then it's changing the pivot table cache to that new value. And it actually it has to be used in conjunction with this macro down here. Basically, this creates this is a function that calls this function here. So you see that you create a variable that has the name of a named data range that you want to update the pivot table cache to, and then you run this right here. You're calling this function right here, and then this is the variable, or this is the argument in this function. So you're calling this is calling this function, and then you're putting in this named data range here. And so this really worked. This really saved us a lot of time. We basically could we updated these pivot tables really easily. Just show some other miscellaneous things that we did. This is a really cool macro. This I had in these 300 accounts, these 300 templates. Sometimes I needed to go in and change certain pivot table information. So this is a macro that let me I could just highlight a list of accounts, and it would automatically open up each file, and then change the value, save it, and then close it and go through. So this, rather than going through, sometimes we have lists of huge lists of things that would take really long to do manually. I could do this automatically really quickly. It would open it, change it, close it, save it automatically. This is a macro that I had just to I was sort of deleting information out of ranges, and I wanted to get rid of the blanks, and so this is a macro just to remove the empty cells. This is a lot of miscellaneous macros that I used, and I don't have time to go through all of them, but just briefly, this is a quick way of just copying and pasting values. This will unhide all sheets in a workbook in case there's any hidden sheets. This will insert multiple rows. Sometimes rather than going right-clicking and going insert, you want to just this will let you run this macro, and it'll give you a prompt, and you say put in 5. I want to insert 5 rows, and it'll insert 5 rows. This does the same thing with columns. This will delete any empty sheets in the workbook. That was really helpful. This is actually one of the most useful macros that I wrote. Basically, I had a workbook that had like literally 20 pivot tables, all in like over across 30 different tabs, and I really wanted to see where all those pivot tables were rather than like look for them manually. This is a macro that it creates an index, creates a new sheet, and it creates an index of all the pivot tables in the workbook, and it will give you the name, the source data, when it was refreshed, who refreshed it, the sheet, and the location, the cell location. And then, so this is a great macro, and you can just run this, and it'll give you a new sheet, and it'll pop up. You'll see every single pivot table in your workbook, and you can go and directly change that one. So that was really useful for me when I was working with this huge complex sheet that had tons of pivot tables, and I really needed a way to quickly do that. Lastly, I wrote a really quick, fast find and replace macro, because I was, as I said, working with 300,000 rows, and this would let me search, find, and replace with all that data much more quickly than the normal Control F. So that's my project. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you.